Alrighty. Hello, whoever is watching this. My name is Michael, and for the last couple months, since about the beginning of February, I've been working on a card game. I play a lot of Commander, and I really like Commander. I really like the free-for-all dynamics, and there's a lot of expression in deck building. But playing a lot of Magic and a lot of Commander, the problems really start to get to you. At least they get to me. Enjoying the mechanics of the game and trying to play through the systems of the game, it can feel kind of like a total roll of the dice what the play experience of Commander is going to be like. The best games, even when everyone is doing their thing, everyone is involved and engaged, so you have a really lively, dynamic game with balanced decks. These can often end up feeling the most arbitrary feeling, the kind of what board game players call the take that element of the game can really dominate what determines the outcome. And at the end of the session, I can often feel like the whole thing was a very unserious experience. I mean, it is known as a casual format, but I think the breadth of experience that people come to EDH looking for is very broad, and so the odds of ending up in a play situation where you're playing against or with folks that have totally different expectations, that have totally different goals, it can be a bit frustrating, and there's no kind of graduation because the play experience of casual multiplayer Magic it has a tone promise, it has a game experience that is fundamentally different and of a different nature in almost every meaningful respect to one-on-one tournament Magic. The leap is just, I think it's a massive chasm. So the last 2 points I have on here are familiar to all Commander players. Honestly, I think if you're not much of a Commander player, this might not be an interesting video. Maybe I should have said this at the top. This video is going to go into some of my experiences in the last few months and my thoughts and concepts that I've been mulling over and trying to work through as I try to come up with some card game that can deliver some of the game feel and the dynamics that I love about Commander, but mitigate some of the downsides of that play experience. Because as far as I can tell, the task of actually trying to have an interactive free-for-all game is not one that many people are interested in, as I found for good reason, but that is nonetheless what I am looking at today. For a long time, I have left Commander nights thinking to myself, oh, it came so close to what I was really looking for, but something came in and spoiled it. By the end of the game, nobody cared who won or lost. And to me, they feel very unsatisfying. It makes me not want to come back to the table or go back to the game store to play another night. But I keep coming back because that kind of dynamic experience, well, I really enjoy it. Anyways, the main thing that kind of led me to think, well, maybe I'm onto something here. Well, actually, I'll go into the goals of Realm first. So Realm is the working title for this game. And the goals are, we want a multipolar feel, similar to Commander, but we want to mitigate some of the pitfalls. So we introduce a bit more structure and control than the kind of arbitrary nature of the game and some of the unpredictable game time, kind of board stalls. Some of this can be mitigated. So we want to maintain the multipolar feel. We want to drive some forward momentum through game systems. And this is the thing that made me think, well, maybe this is actually worth pursuing, is not many card games have a real-time sense of game feel. Like we have like Flesh and Blood, which has this like knockout drag-on fight feeling, and I think that's a very good kind of reference point for there being these other game experiences that, like, I mean, Flesh and Blood is still very much back and forth, but it is a much more fluid experience than something where you're building, you're sculpting your hand, you're planning, etc. with Magic. I know there are other game experiences. The thing that made me say, well, okay, maybe I'll try this out, is we really have kind of one primary casting system or playing system that pervades all card games, and all card games of this type, and there is really only kind of slices or refinements of this. So these are basically, you have sorcery and instant speed. Different games will kind of refine this. Maybe they break down turns into a like I go, you go, but really we're taking turns, right? Bananagrams is a completely simultaneous action game, and there are of course other simultaneous action games, but Bananagrams is extremely fast-paced. You get a set of tiles, and all the other tiles are face down, like on the table. And whenever somebody obtains a valid Scrabble board, they say peel, and everyone has to take a new tile. And once there are no tiles in the center, whoever says peel and actually has a valid board state wins the game. So there are, of course, from a like purely competitive perspective, there's a verification problem in Bananagrams, but at least at the very end, the player who won must have a valid board state. This creates a very, very like frantic, fast-paced game. The main analog to a simultaneous action game that we really have in cards are drafting games or deck building games where maybe you pick and you pass, and the simultaneous thing that you're doing is picking, and so all interaction is very oblique. And that is like interesting in its own right, but I like that the dynamic kind of engine that you build on a typical TCG board state. So anyways, back to the point. The game system idea that I had for this, instead of having sorcery and instant speed, everyone would just have to select their cards simultaneously and reveal them at the same time. So you don't know what anyone else is doing. In order to play a card, you would have basically phase-locked casting. So in the current version, there are a couple iterations of this where I had like a buffered queue or a priority queue, and there would be cards that manipulate the order that things come in. And the current version is, believe it or not, simpler than the things that I had before. But effectively, there's like 3 phases to make room for normal permanence or sorcery speed actions, interaction with those sorcery speed actions, and then meta interaction so that you can, say, redirect a counterspell and such. And then there's mechanics that make it so that if you select actions that are invalid or that you don't want to actually follow through with once everybody reveals their cards, it's not like completely punishing. There is a cost to proposing something, but it is not the end all be all. So this is kind of like the main thing that I wanted to build a game around, is this concept of like, what if we all just selected our plays simultaneously instead of having a back and forth, a drawn out tit for tat, this for that. I have to be able to predict what you're trying to do to some extent, and then we can like resolve the targeting as that plays out. But there's this kind of high stakes showdown feeling is what I wanted from the casting system. I had a lot of different versions of this, different iterations sketched out cards as I began working on it. As I went on, the actual board gameplay, I kind of like swept under the rugs mentally. To me, every creature would just be kind of a victory dork, effectively, and they would just tap to get you points, and then you would build an engine, and people would somehow interact to disrupt each other's engines. But as I came up with more ideas that were a bit more interactive, I came to appreciate the having some like texture to the board state or to the board interaction seemed more and more necessary. So I wanted a system where if player A and B interact, they won't necessarily be losing the parts of their engine that are important or the parts of their board that are important. I wanted a system where they would be competing, but not necessarily destroying each other, so that there could be kind of less higher stakes version of the analog to Magic combat. So this is a workbench that I had Claude slop out. The way that the onboard mechanics work are, so as I mentioned, there's 3 opportunities for casting, but the casting is decoupled from the resolution speed. So I kind of like leaned into this and said, there's 3 speeds of resolution, and the fastest thing will happen on tick 1, and then tick 2, and then most permanents, for example, or sorcery speed things will happen on tick 3. So I said, okay, let's have the beings, the creatures, interact on potentially each of these ticks as well. So you have like the defensive stat and the kind of offensive stat. And this guy, for instance, they will defend for 3 on 2, and they will offend for 4 on 3. And maybe you're starting to hear where some of the problems will come down the line when I start playtesting. But that's the overall concept. And then there are these impact sites. So there's effectively 2 in a 4-person game. And at the beginning of each round, instead of having players select where they're putting their characters and so on and so forth, you go around in a circle after the first kind of reveal of what you're playing this round, and players select where they're going, and everything on their board interacts by default with whoever is also going to that place. And whoever wins will get the resources, or will get some delta of resources. So I kind of sketched that out here, being A and being B, and they come and are competing for, at the time, these were the victory points were called sway. Eventually they end up taking away some points each, based on how fast the creatures are and what their defensive and offensive stats are. And so the interesting thing about this, as I got more and more into it, was like this revelation that the first thing you do is cast a spell, but the most important thing about the game is how do what is the fundamental win condition, right? Like, what are you trying to do? Well, I started with these kind of warp phases. Really, I've become a little mired in the actual dynamics of how beings should interact and what is the best way to design the boots on the ground. Some of the inspiration for these impact sites, big thing that led me to introduce it was an interview with the creator of Animal Kingdom, designed by Stephen Aramini. I'm not 100%. I believe that was the person who was interviewed. The other thing was the Riftbound Battlefields was a fairly good in concept, having this kind of spatial chunking. I thought would be a good way of kind of encouraging multiple players to kind of self-select into usually a one-on-one scenario, that this would create a more fair sense of, like, if you're interacting with me but you're doing it to get your points, then like who can protest, right? Because the priority system in the game rotates every turn, there's always a, like, if you go first, then there'll be some advantages that are conferred with that. But if you go last, then you see what everyone else is doing, and you might be forced into a position, but at least you are like able to react rather than be aggressed upon. So I'm actually fairly happy with at least the bones of the impact system. There's also some land mechanics. So right now there's a separate land deck or resource deck, and this is like a basic resource. And then this is a generic resource, but it's got this mechanism where if you win, then you have the ability to tap a sum total of these stats. Then you'll claim it, and it'll be worth, say, in this case, 5 victory points, which when you're counting up to 20 is a pretty decent amount. And the drawback is that you won't be able to make use of it as a resource until you've claimed it. And if you play it without claiming it, it's just going to be a worse resource. So I kind of wanted to maintain some of the kind of dynamicism of Magic's land system. All other card games, they will try to simplify or strip away the land system in some way. I was interested in what if instead of putting lands in a separate deck to get them out of the way, we're putting them into a separate deck because they are so important they warrant a separate deck. So you can fill your land deck with nothing but basics for maximum kind of consistency, but you could see how you would need to include some of these game-winning resource cards that are worse as resources. And then when you draw them and you say, well, instead of a land, I got a lotus petal for the turn. Right now it's draw from each deck every turn to keep up the card flow a little bit. I'll touch on all the stuff I've done so far. So I went down a rabbit hole way too early, of course, about making some game art. This is a picture of broccoli sprouts I have in my kitchen that I put through a bunch of processing and filters and such. And this is maybe my favorite of the kind of, I still think of these mostly as placeholder arts, but it's my favorite of those so far. I do also like the just paint marker placeholder arts I've ended up doing. Grab, stock images and put them together to try and form little guys. I've been trying to push myself to get more into the mode of actual play testing now that I have kind of at least relatively mature systems. So printing out cards and such. One thing I think is notable. So I got this like Fomemo printer, which is a thermal printer. And I think that this is probably a really good tool to have if you're prototyping in paper. I haven't actually done in-person playtest yet, but with other people at least. You could have playtesters throw out like some ideas and just print them out on the spot. I think that's a pretty neat idea. I haven't done it yet, but I did actually print out some cards and play with them myself, but have yet to do playtests with people in person. Some doodles and stuff. This is kind of for chronicling's sake. Now I'm getting to the reason I decided to make a video. Only done a few playtests so far, and I think that partially comes just from the fact that the main original concept was not a full game, and it wasn't the core of a game. So as I was coming up with different ideas, I was like trying to work backwards into a core game experience. I found playtesting was some things seemed to work okay, but the creature interaction of the casting stuff, all of that, like, oh, you play things simultaneously and such. I've kind of like tabled that as something to focus on or hone or work on, because the core board interaction is not hashed out yet. It's way too sparse there are all kinds of problems introduced by this guy is defending on 2 and this guy is attacking on 3, then and they don't really interact, and keeping track of which beings are fast. It's like everything has a gradation of first strike and flying, basically. It is a very hard thing to keep track of. I think I need to simplify it. I'm just not sure which axis, or if I need to scrap it entirely and start from scratch or something. I knew writing that this is probably not going to be a good idea, but you know, there's 6 potential numbers here. They've got a 7th number in that they have a durability stat. And then like the final thing is like cards that deal damage as an ability because the core combat like stat is non-destructive. The cards that have the ability to deal real damage really kind of take center stage once they're in play, and everything else feels like a victory point dork that's at risk every time you go into combat. I'm not really sure what the next leg of evolution is going to be. Probably the right move is going to be trying to play with actual people. Oh yeah, I had these like action cards. So there's a theme that I want to go for of like wherever I can zag instead of zig. So this is an example of, for instance, Magic. They're putting more and more spells on creatures, and this is kind of the inverse direction of like, well, let's take a ability off of a creature and let them act that out from your hand. And one problem was, okay, so I introduced like Vi's attack and hinders defense, basically. So if something gets a +1 counter, but this guy only does the one thing, like that means that he doesn't actually get buffed by the buff spell. There's like this wild range of interaction space that at least I've found it hard to think through. Maybe it's because the game is immature, but I suspect the board state, I wanted to create something where you make one decision for your board strategy every round, which is like, do I go to A or B? Which for some people is like, what position do I want? And for others is, who do I want to interact with, depending on their priority. But because of how intricate these interactions can get, it ends up really washing out how that kind of high level strategy I wanted to play out works. I'd be curious to hear if anyone has thoughts on what aspects of the on-board interaction seem most enticing, if the stepwise effects or activations seem interesting, or if I should just try and reduce it down to, if you've got a single combat, you don't need to innovate on combat so much. I guess there's this question of like, if I want to maintain this free-for-all balancing, maybe I should lean more into some kind of tableau style, like engine building direction. Obviously, these cards are very much Magic inspired. If you watched this video, thanks for watching it. If you have thoughts as a designer or a human being about the kind of direction, or ways you think it could be simplified, or what aspects of the systems I kind of rambled about are the most interesting or compelling, let me know. Thank you for watching my little video, and let me know what you think about Realm, and what you think is stupid and what you think is awesome, if anything. If you think this is kind of a viable project, or if the free-for-all dynamics of a game like Commander are simply like unsolvable, intractable problems, I'd be curious to hear. Or if you have ideas on how to improve, especially the board state systems, that stuff is really hard to generate novel ideas that aren't super complicated. So, but yep, thanks for watching.